Today's scripture reading comes from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 2, verses 1 through 6, and verses 16 through 18. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose, and have come to worship him." When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And assembling all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it is written by the prophet. And you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod, when he saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, became furious, and he sent and killed all the male children in Bethlehem and in all that region who were 2 years old or under, according to the time that he had ascertained from the wise men. Then was fulfilled what was spoken by the prophet Jeremiah. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping and loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be comforted because they are no more.
Lauding the Dalai Lama as one of the 100 most influential leaders, author Deepak Chopra wrote in Time magazine, "The most inspiring thing the Dalai Lama ever told me was to ignore all organized faiths and keep to the road of higher consciousness. He says, without relying on religion, we look to common sense, common experience, and the findings of science for understanding." So that's the message being screamed at us from our culture. Your common sense will help you make sense of the world. Your experience will dictate the road you should take. What you think about something is the most important thing. But I wonder if we don't see that self-reliance, self-fulfillment, and self-realization are exactly what every tyrant throughout history has engaged in. And now we're teaching our children to do the same thing. So Herod was a self-reliant tyrant. So what I want to look at today is, I want to look at Herod, but I want to compare him with Jesus. And I want to do it with two different points. The 2 points are power and priority. Power and priority. And we're going to look at both Herod and then Jesus. So let's start with power, and let's look at Herod. What do we know about Herod? Well, we know that he was an Edomite. You remember that Jacob had a twin brother. His name was Esau, and he stole the birthright from Esau. And you remember all the story that's in Genesis. If you don't, go look at it in Genesis. Esau became the father of the Edomites. He was the beginning of that race of people. Herod's mother was actually a Jew, but he was not seen as a Jew by the Jews. He was not accepted as a Jew by the Jews, though he longed and thought of himself as the king of the Jews. So this Herod was known as Herod the Great, basically because he actually was great at everything he did. He was very good at playing the political game and gaining influence. He had won over and gained the support of Julius Caesar. And then when Julius Caesar was murdered, he was able to get the support of Caesar Augustus. He developed many trade routes, and trade with other regions. He built a very prosperous seaport. He built many buildings and palaces. He was very good at construction. He built a beautiful palace in Jerusalem. He made many incredible and beautiful additions to the temple there. He built that great hideaway at Masada, which is down by the Dead Sea. I've been there. It's an amazing, there's baths at the top of that thing where they brought water in. I mean, how would you do that? It's way up on top of a plateau. He built the third largest palace in the world called the Herodian, which overlooked Bethlehem. So if you were in Bethlehem, which Mary and Joseph were, court and giving birth in a stable, the presence of the Herodium was always within view because it was way high on a hill and it was absolutely massive. The structure covered 45 acres of land and was surrounded by 200 acres of palace grounds. The upper palace was circular with 4 large towers. It was built on a hill and stood 90 feet tall, as I said. The inner circle of the palace was open to the sky and featured a garden, a reception hall, and various baths. There was also a lower palace that had exotic gardens as well as a huge swimming pool. Herod lived in the lap of luxury. He ruled over Judea. Basically, he ruled unchecked. He could do whatever he wanted there. He actually ruled over a larger part of Palestine than the Jewish kings had ruled over. He lived in lavish luxury. It's been estimated that his wealth was greater than the gross national product of the land he ruled over. So he was the bank, I guess. He had more money than the entire country had. By all definitions, he was a powerful man that lived with all the trappings of power. He could do whatever he wanted. Now let's look at Jesus. I think we understand the incredible contrast we have here. Mary and Joseph, they were both actually descendants of King David, but they had to make the long trek back to Bethlehem from Nazareth for the census that was to be taken. And so as they approached Bethlehem, Mary was ready to give birth, but there was no one that could take them in. Every place was full. Well, they say there's no room in the inn. That translation is very, very loose. Probably wasn't. I've heard sermons against the innkeeper. I don't think there was even an inn. So there was just no place for her to be. And so they went into a place where there were animals, perhaps a cave of some sort. And he was laid in a manger, the feed trough for animals. Now that's the other end of the spectrum, right? Herod was born into nobility. His father was an important person in the Roman Empire. Jesus was born in a stable. Now, you have to think about these contrasts. Bethlehem was a place of farmers and shepherds, the down and out. In fact, in a court of law, the word of a shepherd was not accepted because they were notorious liars. They were not accepted people. Bethlehem had never been the center of anything. In fact, it was an insignificant town in an insignificant corner of the Roman Empire. Its only claim to fame was that King David had been born there, but it was just a shepherd town. It was nothing more. So the false king of the Jews, Herod, lived in a huge palace that overlooked this little shepherd village. And Jesus, the real king of the Jews, was born in a humble stable. So why would God do it that way? Why wouldn't Jesus be born in Caesar's household to be somebody? Why wouldn't he have been the son of a king? Why would he be born to peasants, to people who had no status, no money, absolutely no power, no anything? And what that does is it tells us something about the kingdom of God. The Apostle Paul in Corinthians says it this way: but God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. He chose the lowly things of this world and the despised things and the things that are not to nullify the things that are, so that no one may boast before him. Clearly, Herod had no interest in being one of the foolish things or the lowly things or the weak things of the world. And my friends, I dare say we don't either. Because it doesn't feel good to be weak. It feels so much better to be in control. It feels so much better to be strong. It feels so much better to have the knowledge and for people to look at us and respect us and seek us out for what we know. That feels so good. That just feeds us. And yet the biblical principle is it's the lowly things of the world, the things that are not, the despised things that make foolish the wisdom of this world. How do I know this is true? Well, see if you don't identify with what Cornelius Plantinga says about us. He says this: we do not want suffering, we want success. We identify not with those who are low and hurt, but with those who are high and healthy. We don't like lepers or losers very well. We prefer climbers and comers. For Christians, the temptation to be conformed to this world is desperately sweet and strong. Yet, says the Apostle Paul, we are children of God if we suffer with Christ. Brothers and sisters, I believe we've been so duped by our culture that power feels good to us because it makes us feel like we are significant, like we matter. But it really is an illusion. Power doesn't give us anything. Paul Turnier, in his article in Christianity Today entitled "The Whole Person in a Broken World," says this: the modern myth of power has gravely impoverished our civilization. It has deprived it of all values that lie beyond the search for power. The beautiful, the good, the true cannot be weighed and measured. True knowledge is spiritual knowledge, which is beyond the reach of the world of quantity and therefore is disregarded by our civilization. True knowledge is spiritual knowledge, and we don't get that through power. It's something that's outside of ourselves, not inside. It is found as we acknowledge our weakness and we turn our faces towards God and seek the only one who can save us at all. I think the only way we get this is by reordering our priorities. So let's look at our priorities. Let's look at their priorities first. Herod's priority was himself. Any power he had, he used for himself, and he was ruthless. He was ruthless. He would not hesitate to crush anyone that was a threat, real or imagined, and many of them were imagined. He was absolutely paranoid, so much so that he had multiple people executed. His favorite wife, Maxine, I think her name was, I can't remember her name now. I should have written it down. She was apparently outspoken, and she spoke out one too many times. And so he had her executed. And then he had her two sons executed under some trumped up thing that they were going to try to take over power. They were his sons too. So he had them executed as well. He had his brother executed. He had so many people executed. He left a trail of blood. He was brutal and ruthless. The Jews were against him. And they spread the belief that since he wasn't a Jew, he could not reign on the throne, that the Messiah would be a Jew. So you can understand that when the wise men came that from the east and asked, "Where is the King of the Jews?" this sent him into a tizzy. He's got to get rid of this king, so-called king of the Jews. And so he reacts violently, and he has all children 2 years under killed in Bethlehem. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed. He was disturbed. Herod did not hesitate to wipe out any opposition to his reign. He would be ruthless. He would engage in self-preservation at all costs. How about Jesus? What was Jesus' priority? Well, Jesus' priority was definitely not himself. It was unequivocally his people. And it started with his disciples. Now, there was never a more ragtag group of individuals that absolutely didn't get him whatsoever. I would have given up on them. I would have said it's not worth it. These people are terrible. I don't want anything to do with these people. We have several instances where we see this in the disciples. They smelled a lot more like Herod than they smelled like Jesus. They argued with one another who was the greatest in the kingdom. All of them did. Sitting around talking about who is the greatest. Sounds like us discussing our sports teams. Sounds like us when we were in college with Larry. We would dunk over each other's mothers and fathers, and we would name them by name. And I would dunk over Peggy, which is Larry's mother. That sounds dumb, doesn't it? But it was this bravado thing, right? where you're the greatest of all times, and you're promoting yourself. This is something we do all the time. Well, the disciples are doing it. Who's the greatest in the kingdom? In fact, one of the mothers actually asked if James and John could sit at Jesus' right and left hand when he was in his kingdom. In other words, would you make my boys the greatest in the kingdom? Can you believe they would ask something like that? Well, yeah, I can. I can believe that. I might have asked that. They railed against any kind of discussion of suffering. You remember when Jesus said he would suffer and die, and Peter rebuked him and said, "No, Jesus, that's not what's going to happen here." And Jesus said, "Get behind me, Satan." They had no clue. They smelled so much more like Herod than they smelled like Jesus. And so when we think about Jesus and what he went through with his disciples, it was a constant battle of paradigms. He preached, you win by losing. They preached, you win by winning. They were ready to win. And so after Jesus rebukes Peter, he says these words, "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel will save it." What does that even mean? Well, it means that there are two kingdoms. There is God's kingdom, and then there's our kingdom. What the Dalai Lama is promoting is to build our kingdom. Rely on your common sense and your experience, and you will understand. You will go into a greater consciousness because you will go deeper into yourself. That's one kingdom. The other kingdom is, no, it's not about me. It's about God and what he is doing in the world. There are two kingdoms, and we've been sucked in to building our own kingdom so much of the time. Herod understood it very well. He was all about his own kingdom. He would not be usurped. He was going to kill anybody that got in his way. He would step on anyone that would threaten his kingdom. So here's the thing. If you're building your own kingdom, you may not do the dastardly things that Herod did, but you will still do whatever it takes to build your own kingdom. This can play its way out in simple things like being demanding or living with an edge so that people around you don't push you around, or speaking your mind when you think you're right, or opinionating when you think you know what you're talking about, or being driven or correcting everyone around you. I've always thought that I would write a book called Agendified. That's what I call the building of our own kingdom, agendified. And I could use all examples from my own life. I got my first job as a college professor when I was 28 years old. And as I think back on those years, there were some good things that I did. It wasn't all bad. But I was truly agendified. I was a mover and a shaker at times. And I often stepped on people to get where I was going. I may have shared this story with you. I'm 60 now. I can't remember these things. So if you heard it before, deal with it. the music department at Western State College was going to invest some money. This is college in Colorado where I first got my first job. They were going to invest some money in a MIDI lab. MIDI is musical instrument digital interface. It was a new thing on the market where they were standardizing all the musical digital equipment like synthesizers and keyboards and all kinds of things, computers, and it would all be with the same, you could plug them in with a MIDI cable and they could all read each other no matter what company they came from. They were standardized. And so they were going to invest in some equipment, keyboard, computer, software, and nobody really knew a lot about it, but one of the guys that was into computers was sort of in charge of the MIDI lab. And so that's the way it was, and I was fascinated by this stuff. I spent all my time, my free time in there. I wanted to learn everything. I just love technology, so I wanted to learn everything I could. I wanted to learn the programs. I wanted to learn how it worked. I wanted to record stuff, and it was just so cool to me. So I spent a lot of time in there. But this was all very new way back in 1989 or 1990 when it was happening, when this is taking place. Well, this fellow that was in charge of the MIDI lab didn't know a lot, and he wasn't exactly pushing like I was to learn this stuff. So what did I do? I went to the department chair and I said, look, if we're going to wait on this guy to teach a class in this stuff, we're never going to get there. I think you need to give me the MIDI lab and let me teach a class in this. And she agreed. She agreed. So she took the MIDI lab away from him and she gave it to me, and I taught a class every semester after that. Just a basic class in understanding this stuff for students. Now, wasn't that cool? I was too young and immature to realize that I had stepped all over this other guy. I didn't realize it until we had already left there, gone to Chile, came back from Chile, were out there visiting people that had supported us in Chile. We were visiting, and his wife had a fabric store on Main Street, and I went in there, just to say hello, and she gave me the complete cold shoulder. And it dawned on me. They were carrying a grudge against me because in my quest to get what I wanted, I had stepped all over this guy without even talking to him. In the years hence, I sent him several letters of apology. Never heard another word. And he died about 5 years ago of a heart attack. So I never got to reconcile that relationship. Brothers and sisters, that's the Herod road. That is I get to do what I want, and it doesn't matter who I step on. That is the Dalai Lama road. I rely on my experience, on my intuition, on my common sense. The problem is that my common sense is faulty, and it doesn't consider other people. That's the Herod road. But Jesus is so different. Jesus came to rescue people. His kingdom is built only by sacrifice. He would lay down his life for his people, and this is his call to us, to lay down first our agendas and then our lives for others. Brothers and sisters, it's hard to think about rescuing others when we are stepping on their heads so we can get ahead. It's hard to think about rescuing others when we're angry in traffic. It's hard to think about rescuing others when we are being demanding about our own agenda, either with our spouse or with our children or with our friends or with our work people we work with. It's hard to think about rescuing others when we are defending our rights and our reputations. It's hard to think about rescuing others when we are arguing our point because we think we are right. That's the Herod road. And it's the wrong priority. But when we make our priority the kingdom of God, then we give up our power for self-promotion and we use whatever power we have for the sake of others. Viktor Frankl was a Jewish psychiatrist and a neurologist who had survived a Nazi concentration camp. He wrote this very famous book called Man's Search for Meaning. And he realized that the people in the concentration camp were under a great deal of pressure. He noticed that there were three different groups of people that were trying to cope with the atrocities that were happening around them. The first group was made up of people that became very cruel and in some cases sinister. So they began to steal other people's food. They began to steal other people's possessions. They did whatever they had to survive, including collaborating with the Nazis. The second group of people just withered away to the point of dying. They just couldn't cope. They collapsed. They didn't look people in the eye because they didn't want to see them. They were consumed with their own misery. And then there was a third group of people that was able to maintain the capacity to give themselves for others. The first two groups were completely absorbed with themselves. Only this third group was able to maintain hope, love, and a perspective on the world that included others. And by the way, they weren't even groups. The first and third groups were very small. The second group was very big, the one that withered away. When Frankl was released from the camp, he began to reflect on the reasons for the three different groups. Why would these groups respond in such different ways? The conclusion he came to was that everyone lives for something. Some live for their careers, some for their family, some for the approval of others. Some live to gain power or influence. Some live to have social status. What is it that gives significance to your life? And Frankl realized that everyone was living for things that the concentration camp could take away. The only ones that could maintain a heroic posture, the only ones that didn't go crazy, were those whose significance in life was not something that the concentration camp could take away from them. Do you realize what Jesus is offering you? No circumstance in this world can take it away. No pandemic can take it away. No untimely death can take it away. No weirdness in a political system can take it away. No sliding down a road that we don't like can take it away. Nothing can take it away because he offers us what is a future. He offers us a hope. He offers us himself, where he gave his life for his people to take care of their sins, to release them from their bondage, to look for things in this world, things that people can take away from us. This is why we are anxious. This is why we are angry, because we've put our hopes on things that people can take away from us. And he's offering us so much more than that. Jesus gave his life for us. Have you seen that? This is ultimate hope, brothers and sisters. That's the gospel, and it changes everything. Let's pray.